We have with us Katie Gone and Andrea Schur. They are going to talk about local facets. Katie has been a faculty member at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga since 2011. She currently serves as the head of collection services, where she leads teams involved with acquisitions, electronic resources, interlibrary loan, stats, course reserves, and special collections. In 2017, she led the team charged with migrating from OCLC's WMS to ALMA. She defines herself as a generalist and big thinker, but her background is in management of electronic resources and the systems used to manage and access them. She holds a BA in English Lit and a master's in information science from the University of Tennessee at Knoxville. Andrea Schur has been a faculty member at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga Library since 2001, serving as head of the Access Services Department until 2009, when she escaped into library information technology. As digital development librarian, she performs custom coding and database work, as well as data analysis for various library projects. She holds an MS in computer science from the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, and both an MS-LIS and bachelor's degree in music and music education from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I will notify you about 20 minutes in when we are where we are with the time, and you can address questions as you see fit or at the end of the presentation. Go ahead and get started.
We're going to get our screen sharing and get started. Maybe. Okay. All right. So now we know everyone can see us. Hi. So this is Katie. Welcome to our presentation. We're going to just go through really a practical, we think, kind of step-by-step application of a problem that we encountered soon after migrating. We're going to go through what that problem is. We're going to talk about what local resource types are and what we did, what our solutions were. And then we're going to walk through the process. And then we have a little bit of kind of ongoing work that we'll go through at the end. So basically, our problem when we migrated, one of the things that we had on our migration team was we had two separate teams. We had kind of the ALMA team and the Primo team. And everything kind of worked really well as the migration can work, right? And then we got to launch, which was at the very first day, pretty much, of our spring semester when everybody came back from winter break. And our R&I librarians and those at our checkout desk started saying, wait, we have this big issue. We can't find our physical resources really easily. And we had made a decision not to do a scope search of our physical items because it was kind of, in our usability testing, it was kind of hidden and people didn't really use it. And so we hadn't done that. We thought people would use the Find in Library little button in Primo, but they weren't. So our librarians at the desks really, really wanted to see Facet for our physical items. So we started scurrying to try to figure out, well, how do we do this? We also realized there wasn't really a good location limiter, and a lot of our kind of things could be found by different locations in our library. So our solution was to use local resource types in ALMA to be able to pull out our physical resources from the electronic resources that were coming from the Primo Central Index. Because everything, the facets are kind of managed via R type. So if there's an R type of book for an electronic book in the PCI, and there's an R type for a book that's coming from our ALMA inventory, we'll put those together into a books facet, and that's what everyone was seeing. But what they really wanted to see was, what are the physical books in the library and what are the electronic books? So we decided to use the local resource type configuration. One of the things that we didn't look at and we didn't know was really possible was actually combining e-facets or facets that were coming from our electronic collections and our local inventory with the electronic collection in the PCI, but we've just realized that that's possible. So we're starting to look into doing that too. We'll talk a tiny bit, if we have time at the end, about that. The way we did this was we mapped all of our records in our local ALMA inventory using a 900 field. We used the 901 field with the subfield A, and we added the local resource type code into that field. Some of the things that you had to do, though, was to really plan out and think about what physical items you wanted to kind of call out in facets and what you had in your collection. And because this is all at the bib level, we had to remember that there might be a few or some of those weird items that might have a bib record with kind of different item types on it, like a book that has a CD with it, or weird things like that. So there are nuances that you have to really plan out and think about. One of the things that was really good that we did when we migrated was we had actually migrated a material type, kind of format type, over in a notes field with all of our items, just because we could, and we were looking at our data in different ways. And so we were more easily able to kind of pull these out because we kind of had done some of that work prior for a different reason. But if you want to do this, you really need to plan out what you kind of want those facets to be. Also, when we migrated, there were only 5 local resource types available to us. There are now 20. So we had to make some decisions, and you'll kind of see this a little bit in some of our screen captures. All of our physical video material types we put into one called Videos Physical. So that was DVDs, that was VHS, Blu-rays, all of that was all in one. Now we're kind of working through pulling that kind of stuff out. We didn't deal at all with icons. You can put different icons for different local material types as well. And then the last thing you kind of have to think about is once you get all of this set up and it's beautiful for that 10 minutes that you don't have new things coming into your collection, you're going to have new things that come into your collection. So you also have to create some normalization rules on your imports of records to make sure that new books and new video and new other items that you're getting in are actually getting those codes set automatically in the way you want. And then on top of that, you should probably have some Q&A reports that you run on a regular basis to kind of catch problems as they come. So from here, I'll let Andrea kind of just walk through the process. And this is literally, hopefully you can take this presentation and do this. Andrea is a guru systems person with a lot of experience in records as well. But anybody we think can do this. You don't have to, it's a little planning and maybe asking a few questions of others. And also just know we're happy to help you guys if anybody wants to do this in the future.
All right, so it's time for me to do some show and tell. I will say that all of this is documented by Ex Libris, but what we found is that there are a lot of sort of steps where you get pointed out to different things, or that might vary depending on how you're approaching your local resource types and identifying sets and all that kind of stuff. And so we felt like having a real sort of step-by-step clarified how this process works. So the first thing we're going to talk about is defining local resource types. This is off in your ALMA configuration under Discovery and Local Resource Types. And here you're going to set up any local resource type, any of those 20 local resource types that you're going to want to apply to physical or electronic items that are in your local inventory. Keep in mind, you cannot affect resource types at all in the PCI. And so this allows you to map things either differently than what's coming in from the PCI or the same as what's coming in from the PCI, so that you can better meld with all of that other data that is showing up in your discovery system. So you'll set up a code for this particular local resource type. In this case, what we're demoing is VHS materials. So we made our code PVHS. You set up a singular label. This is the one that will go with a given item of this resource type or R type. You'll also set up the plural label. This is the one that'll show up in the faceting down the left-hand side of Primo VE. Make sure to set it as active. If it's not, doesn't do you any good. And then I'll just quickly mention this RIS type, metadata format, and genre. We currently set the RIS type as close as we can, but I will tell you that there is nothing that we're doing right now with local resource types that relies on any of these things. And in fact, we can't even really customize our metadata formats very well. So these are extra fields that might be useful in some setting, but are not at all relevant to what we're doing right now. And then finally, this mapping of MARC records. This is where you actually say, for this particular thing, PVHS, I want you to look in the 901 field, subfield A. So we decided that was where we were going to put stuff. And we actually looked through our bibliographic records in our collection before we made that choice to make sure we weren't going to overlap with anything that was existing. So you have to be a little careful because you can accidentally apply a resource type. And then it's looking for PVHS in that MARC field. So now that we've set that up, it will automatically enter in your labels configuration. It'll automatically put those labels that we just set up for singular and plural. It sets up the plural label in the Facet resource type labels and the singular label in the icon codes labels. And you'll actually see here, there's our R type for PVHS and the translation that will show up in the faceting. And you'll see what we had done in the past. We had done this P video when we only had 5 resource types to choose from and called them videos physical. And then you'll also see here, this video one, that's something that's going to be coming possibly from the PCI. It could be coming from our collections if we have not locally defined them. And that's where we made the decision that anything that we were not specifically labeling, we were going to assume is electronic. So that's kind of how you make this distinction. You define everything in your local collection and then assume that everything else is part of an e-collection. All right, and then you'll see right here a picture of Primo VE. Once these things are in, the plural label shows up in the faceting or the formatting down that left-hand side, and then the singular label shows up with an individual line. That's once you've done all of the other work. So the next step is to add that local resource type to your bibliographic records. And there are several pieces of this. First, you're going to create a normalization rule so that you can do this to your collection en masse. And so we went to our metadata editor and created a new normalization rule called add 901 PVHS. And notice that it is also shared and enabled. Those are 2 important things. If you make it private, you're not going to be able to add it to a job later, which is going to be really important. And then this is that normalization rule that we created. So what this basically says is that for the rule named add field 901 with PVHS, when there is not a 901 subfield A PVHS, when it doesn't see that, it should remove all the 901 fields. We don't want conflicts. We don't want there to be a 901 field that's conflicting with our PVHS. And then it should add the 901 subfield A PVHS field into the bibliographic record. Now, also for ongoing, as Katie mentioned, you have to think about the normalization rule that you're going to apply to ongoing accessioning of materials into your collection. And so we don't have one specifically for VHS, but we did have one for because we're not actually adding VHS to our collection really anymore. But we do have one for P video, which was our old category. And basically all this one does is it looks in the leader, position 6 for an M, a P, or a G. And if it sees one of those things, then it applies our 901 field. So that is how we apply this in an ongoing way to newly accessioned items. Now next, you have to take that normalization rule and add it to a normalization process back out in configuration. So from configuration, you go to resources, cataloging, metadata configuration, and MARC 21 bibliographic. So there's metadata configuration, and then we're going to choose the MARC 21 bibliographic normalization process. And then we're going to add a process and name that process. So this process is going to add a 901p VHS. And then we're going to add tasks to that process. And because we're adding a normalization rule, we're going to choose as the kind of task we're going to add a marked rule normalization. And then we're going to look for our add 901p VHS materials formats normalization rule. This is where it's really important. If you had not shared that normalization rule, if you'd made it private, you wouldn't see it in this list. And you'd be like, where did it go? So it's really important to share it so that you can actually add it to a normalization rule. And then you save that. All right, next, we're going to apply local resource types to the bibliographic record. So now we've got a job that we can use. So next, we're going to make a set of things we want to apply that job to. So in this case, all of our VHS are stored in a single location. So we're going to look in VHS storage, and we're going to save a query that lists all of those 3,600 items. But then the problem is we're applying this job not to a list of items, but to a list of bibliographic records. So in order to actually use our job on the set, we've got to convert our items, our list of items, into a list of bib records. And in order to do that, we first have to itemize the logical set. So next we're going to itemize that set. And then once we have an itemized set, we can then create a title set, which is a bibliographic record level set from those items. And once we've done that, then we've got a set that we can run our normalization job on. So now I'm going to go to Alma, Admin, Manage Jobs and Sets, and Run a Job. And I'm going to choose my Mark 21 bib normalization job. And I limit it by VHS because of the way I've named it. And then what I'll see is I've got my Add 901 PVHS material formats job that I created a little bit ago in configuration. And once I go in there, I'm able to choose an all titles list, in this case my VHS titles list, to normalize and add the 901 field to. So I'm going to make sure that that job looks correct, run the job. And then what's going to happen to all 3,600 of those records is you're going to get this PVHS 901 field added to every single record. Now, the final step in this process is you have to reindex all of those records that you just added the 901 field so that Alma and Primo know that we want that 901 field to be reflected as the R type. So that last step is to go back into Manage Jobs and Sets and Run a Job and choose your VHS titles list that you already had. So the same titles list that you just added the 901 fields to. And then you are going to run the recalculate local resource types job on that list. And once you do that, then you will start to see, and maybe wait a few minutes, you will start to see under format when you do a search that video VHS and anything that it's applied to it. So in this case, this is the record that we saw earlier with a faceted video VHS and also that SUNYLA label as well.
And for this demonstration, we only did it on one record. So that's why you saw the, we didn't do all of our VHS yet. So we're still going. We're working on utilizing our 20, so our additional 15 local resource types. We also have to do some thinking about mapping some of our digital collections to some local resource types to make those more findable. And also solving the duplicate facets. So we didn't really realize that we could simply locate the R type that electronic resources from the PCI were kind of tagged as, and then add that R type to our 901 field in electronic collections in our local inventory and have those facets kind of meld together. I don't know why, we just never thought about that. And so now what we're doing is going into looking at running lots of searches in Primo VE to try to figure out what the R type is of certain large collections in the PCI, and then going back to our local electronic inventory and mapping the R type from the PCI for those electronic collections into our local ones in the 901 field, because now we know Primo's looking at our 901 field, and then it was melding those. So we're doing that first with our streaming video so that we can get all of our streaming video into one facet. So that's going to be some detective work that we're kind of working on right now. Did I say that correctly? Hopefully. So we tried to be really fast, so that was 21 minutes. If you guys have any questions, there are a few that have kind of been out there. Somebody asked if we've considered adding a resource type image for each one that we've created. Yes, we haven't done anything with the icon labels. We're kind of a small, scrappy group of both collections and IT, so we kind of put out a lot of fires. So we are hoping to kind of do a lot more planning now with some of these. And honestly, doing this presentation was like, oh wow, we can do a lot more than we could when we had moved on. And we're thinking a lot about the CDI, downstairs and collection services, and we haven't quite gotten to planning how that's going to impact some of this right now. We're actually getting ready to hire, we're cataloger-less right now. She's just retired, so we're getting ready to hire a new metadata person. So some of that will be working with our e-resources librarian on that. Yes, and you're right, the CDI will have different resource types. All of this changes, as we all know. It changes as soon as you get something in place. Things change. Thus, the QA reports are always really helpful with this stuff. There were some questions that came up in the chat, and Andrea hadn't really. Had a chance to look at them. That's why I was trying to. Sorry.
See, one of those questions, we did something similar but created multiple local resource types that mapped ebook, that allowed us to label something as an ebook if it had relevant data. That allowed us to use community zone records but still tease out the ebooks from the physical inventory. Yeah, and I think one of the things that we were seeing is that physical inventory was actually combining with ebooks, and so we took the tact on that particular thing that we would define the physical things and then assume that everything in the PCI is electronic. But really what we're talking about now is also taking anything that's electronic in our local inventory and defining it so that it matches the PCI, so that those will then properly combine into facets. So we're doing that work right now. Let's see.
I think you kind of hit the question that's currently in the Q&A with that same answer. What about new video records coming into ALMA using the same normalization rules?
Yeah, so we have a normalization rule for physical videos that looks at the leader and will add the correct code in our 901 field. We need to do that for our electronic collections now to put the R type, the actual R type, not a code. So actually we found that a lot of the streaming media that we were looking at from the PCI had media as the R type, but that's not always the case. There's a handful of different ones. But we need to create normalization rules that when we add portfolios or to our electronic collections, that we're adding the actual R type. So media would be added to our 901 field, and that is what causes the collapsing of the facet, or all of the things to show up in one facet. At least that's how we are looking at it.
See, another question I see up here in chat. We've had trouble picking more than one field and subfield. There doesn't seem to be a way to pick more than one. You know, it looks like in the configuration like you can, but to be perfectly honest, we've sort of had the same experience, which is why we chose the 901 subfield A and are intentionally populating that instead of trying to rely on the broader bibliographic record and pulling out from different fields in existing bibliographic records. So we specifically chose a single field and subfield that we're using for resource types exclusively. Let's see.
Yeah, we're not doing any crazy deduping algorithms for discovery.
No.
We're just doing good to get all of our new stuff in and as findable as possible at this point. We are having a lot of consternation, as an aside, of just things that are now going into PCI only instead of into the knowledge base as you know, things that you can localize and control more of. So we're finding that to be problematic in some ways, especially with streaming media. But I don't have a good solution for that right now. Now, duplicate records hasn't honestly been something our patrons or our librarians on the desk have been screaming about so much. It will probably be an issue when it comes up for us. We'll have to deal with it then. So feel free. We're happy to share our basic normalization rules that we've created for importing our records, or just chat with anybody who wants to talk through this. We could probably learn from each other about things that others are doing to kind of make Primo or Primo VE a more usable interface, especially as the PCI grows. I think this will become a bigger issue. This was one of those things when we migrated that I was like, there are 8 million tables that we can configure within Alma. Why isn't there some sort of master resource table that allows us to kind of set all this stuff up? So maybe someday we'll get that. So thank you guys for your time. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you so much for your presentation.
Yeah.